The year is 1902. A young man sits alone in the scorching desert, his family's fortress reduced to rubble behind him. His father is dead. His enemies control every major city. He has 30 followers, a handful of camels, and a dream that seems impossible. His name is Abdul Aziz al-Saud, and in 25 years, he will rule over most of the Arabian Peninsula and control the world's largest oil reserves. But right now, he's planning the most audacious raid in Arabian history. What happened next would reshape the Middle East forever, create the world's largest oil empire, and birth a nation that didn't exist on any map just a century ago. This is the real story of how Saudi Arabia was formed, and it's nothing like what you've been told. The Al Saud family wasn't always powerful. In fact, they were nobody special, just another tribal clan scratching out a living in the harsh Najd region of Central Arabia. But in 1744, something changed everything. A wandering preacher named Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab knocked on their door, and with him came an idea that would conquer a continent. Abd al-Wahhab was furious about what he saw in the Islamic world. Muslims were visiting shrines, asking saints for help, and practicing what he called innovations that corrupted pure Islam. He wanted to strip away centuries of tradition and return to the religion's roots. Most tribal leaders laughed at him or chased him away, but Muhammad ibn Saud, the Al Saud clan leader, saw opportunity. The deal they struck was brilliant in its simplicity. Abd al-Wahhab would provide religious legitimacy and passionate followers. Ibn Saud would provide military muscle and political leadership. Together, they would purify Islam and expand their territory. It was a partnership between sword and scripture that would echo through centuries. Their followers became known as Wahhabis, though they called themselves the true believers. They swept across Arabia like wildfire, capturing town after town. They destroyed shrines, banned music, and enforced strict religious law. By 1803, they controlled Mecca and Medina, the holiest cities in Islam. The Ottoman Empire, which had ruled these lands for centuries, was humiliated. But success bred enemies. The Ottomans couldn't tolerate losing the holy cities. They sent their most capable general, Muhammad Ali Pasha of Egypt, with a modern army and artillery. The first Saudi state crumbled under the assault. In 1818, the last Al Saud ruler was dragged to Constantinople and publicly executed. The family's capital, Diriyah, was destroyed so thoroughly that grass grew in its ruins. Most dynasties would have ended there. But the Al Sauds had planted something deeper than political power. They had created a religious movement that lived in the hearts of Bedouin tribes across the peninsula. Within 7 years, another Al Saud prince emerged from the desert to rebuild their kingdom. The second Saudi state lasted 60 years, but it too faced destruction. This time, the enemy came from within. The Al Saud family split into warring factions, each claiming the right to rule. Brothers fought brothers, cousins betrayed cousins. The kingdom tore itself apart in a civil war that left it weak and vulnerable. The Al-Rashid family, longtime rivals from the northern city of Hale, saw their chance. They allied with the Ottomans and struck hard. In 1891, they captured the Saudi capital of Riyadh. The Al Saud family fled into exile, seeking refuge with friendly tribes in Kuwait. Their second kingdom was finished. This brings us back to that young man in the desert in 1902. Abdul Aziz Al Saud was 22 years old and tired of exile. His father had given up hope of reclaiming their homeland, but Abdul Aziz burned with ambition. He gathered 40 followers and set out to do the impossible, recapture Riyadh with a force smaller than a modern high school class. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Abdul Aziz didn't plan a glorious battle or a siege. Instead, he chose deception. He would sneak into the city at night and capture the governor's fortress before anyone knew what was happening. It was either brilliant or suicidal, depending on your perspective. On January 15th, 1902, Abdul Aziz and his men approached Riyadh's walls in darkness. They climbed over using palm tree trunks as ladders. Most of the group hid in a house belonging to a secret supporter, but Abdul Aziz and 6 companions crept toward the Masmak fortress, where the al-Rashid governor lived. The plan was simple but dangerous. When the governor emerged for morning prayers, they would rush him and seize the fortress. If they succeeded, they could hold the strongest point in the city. If they failed, they would all die. There was no middle ground. Dawn broke. The fortress gates opened. Governor Ajlan stepped out with his bodyguards, heading to the mosque. Abdul Aziz and his men charged from their hiding place. In the chaos that followed, Ajlan was killed, and the Al-Sauds seized the fortress. The city's residents, seeing their flag flying from the walls, rallied to their cause. Riyadh was theirs again, but capturing one city was just the beginning. The Al-Rashids still controlled most of Central Arabia. The Ottomans backed them with money and weapons. Abdul Aziz had won a single battle, not a war. What he did next would determine whether the Al-Saud family would rise again or disappear forever. Abdul Aziz understood something his enemies didn't. Arabia wasn't just about cities and fortresses. It was about tribes, loyalty, and religious passion. He began reaching out to Bedouin clans, reminding them of the old alliance between the Al-Sauds and the Wahhabi movement. He offered them something the Al-Rashids couldn't, a holy war to purify Islam and expand their territory. The response was electric. Tribe after tribe declared for Abdul Aziz. Warriors flocked to his banner, seeing him as the rightful heir to the first Saudi kingdom. But Abdul Aziz added a new element that his ancestors had never used. He created a religious army called the Ikhwan, or Brothers. The Ikhwan were Bedouins who gave up their nomadic lifestyle to live in agricultural settlements. They studied Wahhabi teachings, prayed 5 times daily, and trained for war. They saw themselves as God's soldiers, fighting to establish his kingdom on earth. They were fanatically loyal, incredibly brave, and absolutely ruthless in battle. With the Ikhwan as his core force, Abdul Aziz began expanding his territory. He captured town after town, always offering the same choice: submit to his rule and accept Wahhabi Islam, or face destruction. Most chose submission. Those who resisted were crushed without mercy. By 1913, Abdul Aziz controlled the entire Najd region, but his greatest prize still lay ahead: the eastern province, home to the Shia Muslim population and unknown oil reserves. The Ottomans held this region through local governors, but their grip was weakening as World War I approached. Abdul Aziz struck in May 1913, capturing the port city of Hofuf after a brief siege. The eastern province fell into his hands like ripe fruit. He now controlled a territory larger than France, stretching from the Persian Gulf to the edge of the Hijaz region that contained Mecca and Medina. But the Great War changed everything. The Ottoman Empire joined Germany and Austria-Hungary, while Britain sought allies wherever it could find them. Suddenly, Abdul Aziz found himself courted by both sides. The Ottomans offered him recognition as governor of Najd if he would fight the British. The British offered him money and weapons if he would fight the Ottomans. Abdul Aziz chose neither, and both. He signed a treaty with Britain in 1915, accepting their protection and a monthly subsidy. But he avoided major military commitments, letting other Arab leaders like Sharif Hussein of Mecca do the heavy fighting against the Ottomans. It was a masterful display of political cunning that kept his forces intact while his rivals exhausted themselves. The war's end in 1918 left the Middle East in chaos. The Ottoman Empire collapsed. European powers carved up Arab lands into new countries with artificial borders. But Abdul Aziz had positioned himself perfectly to take advantage of the confusion. His first target was his old enemy, the Al-Rashid family. Their patron, the Ottoman Empire, was gone. Their territory was surrounded by Abdul Aziz's forces. In 1921, after a series of battles, the last Al-Rashid ruler was killed and their capital of Hale surrendered. The family that had driven the Al-Sauds into exile was extinct, but Abdul Aziz's greatest challenge still lay ahead. The Hijaz region, containing Mecca and Medina, was ruled by Sharif Hussein, the man who had led the Arab revolt against the Ottomans. Hussein claimed to be the rightful leader of all Arabs and had even declared himself Caliph, the spiritual leader of all Muslims. He controlled the holy cities and the lucrative pilgrimage trade that brought millions of Muslims to Arabia each year. The confrontation between Abdul Aziz and Hussein was inevitable. They represented two different visions of the Arab future. Hussein wanted a liberal, cosmopolitan Arab kingdom connected to the wider world. Abdul Aziz wanted a strict Islamic state based on Wahhabi principles. Only one vision could survive. The war began in 1924 when Abdul Aziz's Ikhwan warriors invaded the Hijaz. They moved like a desert storm, capturing town after town. Hussein's forces, trained by British officers and equipped with modern weapons, should have been superior, but they lacked the religious passion that drove the Ikhwan forward. The siege of Taif, a mountain city near Mecca, showed the world what the Ikhwan were capable of. When the city fell, they massacred hundreds of civilians, destroyed musical instruments, and banned smoking. The brutality shocked even Abdul Aziz, who began to worry that his religious warriors were becoming too extreme. Hussein fled to Cyprus as his kingdom crumbled. In December 1925, Abdul Aziz entered Mecca in triumph. The holy cities were his. The pilgrimage routes were under his control. He had achieved what his ancestors could only dream of, dominion over the birthplace of Islam. But victory brought new problems. The Ikhwan who had won his battles now questioned his authority. They wanted to continue expanding, to carry their holy war into Iraq, Jordan, and Kuwait. They criticized Abdul Aziz for using modern technology like cars and telephones, which they saw as corrupting innovations. They demanded that he enforce Wahhabi law more strictly, even on foreign pilgrims visiting Mecca. Abdul Aziz found himself caught between his fanatical followers and the practical needs of governing a modern state. The Ikhwan had made him king, but now they threatened to destroy everything he had built. The final confrontation came in 1929 at the Battle of Sabila, where Abdul Aziz used modern weapons and tactics to crush the Ikhwan rebellion. The religious warriors who had conquered Arabia for him were defeated by the king they had created. On September 23, 1932, Abdul Aziz issued a royal decree that changed history. The various regions under his control would be unified into a single nation called the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. It was the first time in over a century that most of the Arabian Peninsula had been united under one ruler. A kingdom born from desert raids and religious passion now took its place among the nations of the world. But the greatest transformation was still to come. In 1933, Abdul Aziz granted an oil concession to an American company that would become Aramco. The first commercial oil was discovered in 1938, just as World War II was beginning. Suddenly, the desert kingdom, sitting on top of the world's largest oil reserves, became one of the most strategically important countries on Earth. The young man who had captured Riyadh with 40 followers had created something unprecedented, a nation that combined medieval religious law with modern oil wealth, tribal traditions with global influence. Saudi Arabia became the guardian of Islam's holiest sites and the world's largest oil exporter, a contradiction that continues to shape global politics today. Abdul Aziz ruled until his death in 1953, having transformed a collection of warring tribes into a unified kingdom. His sons have ruled ever since, maintaining the alliance between the Al Saud family and the Wahhabi religious establishment that began in 1744. The partnership between political power and religious authority that started with a handshake in a desert village now influences events from Washington to Beijing. The story of Saudi Arabia's formation reveals how a small tribal family used religious passion, political cunning, and military skill to create one of the world's most influential nations. It shows how a young man's desperate gamble in 1902 led to the birth of a kingdom that would reshape the global economy and spread its religious ideas across the Muslim world. From that moment when Abdul Aziz sat alone in the desert with 30 followers to the modern kingdom that pumps millions of barrels of oil daily, Saudi Arabia's rise represents one of the most remarkable transformations in modern history. It's a story of ambition and faith, of violence and diplomacy, of ancient traditions adapting to modern realities. The kingdom that emerged from the desert sands continues to influence world events today, its oil wealth funding global development while its religious ideas shape Islamic movements worldwide. The alliance forged between the Al Saud family and Wahhabi clerics nearly 3 centuries ago remains the foundation of Saudi power, proving that some partnerships can indeed change the world. This is how Saudi Arabia was really formed, not through the grand designs of empires or the decisions of foreign powers, but through the vision of a young man who refused to accept exile as his family's fate. His gamble in the darkness of a January night in 1902 created a kingdom that would become one of the most important nations of the modern age.